Welcome to Chapter 4, The New Suburban Dream. And again, it is a dream shaped by the challenges that suburbs face that, in effect, unlock the opportunities that suburbs have going forward. And lest that sound confusing, let's come back to that quote. North America is a suburban continent with an urban population. This urban population is seeking walkable, mixed-use, community-rich places to live, work, and play. These are folks who want to live in downtown Manhattan, New Rochelle, New York, the newer versions of Levittown. The dream is no longer a backyard of my own, a garden of my own, an easy commute to my job in the city, or better yet, a nearby office park. The dream today is about a place, that community that meets my lifestyle. And the majority of us, because of the nature of our households, have a lifestyle that really values walkable, mixed-use, community-rich places. At one point, there was a suburban dream of folks who longed for their own single-family house with a white picket fence and a beautiful lawn, or the urban dream, which was a loft like Will and Grace had, and a great pub like Cheers that they could walk to. Today, those dreams have come together for most of us, for the large majority of folks, and it is a walkable, mixed-use, community-rich place to live, work, and play, whether it's the suburbs or a city. I was asked to work with the terrific community of Richmond Hill, which is a suburban community, a large suburban community of more than 200,000 folks outside of Toronto, to help them develop a new model for growth that shifted away from relatively affluent single-family neighborhoods and trying to build more of them, toward focusing growth toward refilling the strip centers, malls, sort of urban areas that had been bypassed by housing development and newer development for many decades, to create a series of urban, walkable, mixed-use corridors and centers, not just because these are the places that could attract the next era of growth to Richmond Hill that matched our changed housing markets, but also to create a new kind of amenity for folks who already lived in their wonderful single-family houses in Richmond Hill, places they could walk to, that they could bike to. Somebody in Dublin who really resisted the idea of creating a new downtown suddenly said, oh, wait a second, I can get on my bike, get my kids on their bikes, even get my husband to get on his bike, and we can ride to Bridge Park, the new downtown, and get ice cream. The light went off and, again, didn't change a blade of grass on her yard or in any front of any house in her subdivision or neighborhood, whichever she called it, but it added a new level of amenity to living for those who want to live in suburbs in traditional ways. So what did Planning for Change talked about? It helped people understand who had lived very different lives, how their children, and even some of them as they grew older, or changed their values, were shifting the kind of aspirations they had for Richmond Hill, just as they are for suburban communities across America. This is South Bay Mall. It's not quite the suburbs, but the edge of downtown Boston. It's made up of big box. It's a mall made up of big boxes like Old Navy, Home Depot, etc. As these boxes are losing business, you can see a sea of parking here. The occupied parking area is shrinking and coming in closer and closer to those stores as they close, disappearing altogether. This new urban, mixed-use, walkable neighborhood is moving in and replacing that parking, and at some point when the big boxes are gone, will replace all of the South Bay Plaza with a new mixed-use, walkable, in this case, urban neighborhood that is exactly like the kinds of great new mixed-use, walkable neighborhoods being built in suburbs, replacing suburban malls across North America. It is a place that is built around the lifestyles of the market today, just as the mall was built for the lifestyle of markets 30, 40 years ago. This is another look at Bridge Park in Dublin, Ohio. And let's stop for a minute and think about how now demographics and a changing economy come together, because clearly it is changing demographics that are building this, the new housing market, that are also building Bridge Park in Dublin. But let's think back now to, why did Dublin decide to build Bridge Park? One was to create a new source of amenity for all the folks who lived in single-family houses there. They got that the single-family market was going to be more challenged. To be blunt, Dublin said, if we have a lot of single-family houses here, we want ours to be in more demand than single-family houses in other suburbs. We're going to build a great downtown, a great center, a new heart for our community, to make our single-family neighborhoods more appealing compared to communities that don't have this kind of heart and center. Dublin also recognized that it wanted to have a commercial tax base, not just rely on housing, that it actually had a tradition of attracting knowledge industry jobs out of Columbus into single-use office parks. I remember marveling talking to the planner there years ago. The one requirement was that they had to be surrounded by lots of great landscaping. Anything could happen inside that office park as long as when you drove by you didn't see it. Well, that clearly is not the future of knowledge industry jobs, of our innovation and tech industries. Folks not only want to live, they want to work in mixed-use, walkable, lively environments. And so Bridge Park, the new downtown, was also built to create a place that doesn't require a car, because actually nothing correlates more highly with education for younger members of our workforce under 35 than not needing to depend on a car. And I'm going to digress for a moment here and say, if you're a tech, an innovation company, if you're part of the knowledge industry, you are very aware that most folks will move before the age of 35 and then stay someplace. Meaning, if you want someone to be part of your company for years to come, you probably want to attract them before they're 35. You're trying to compete for folks over 35, it's going to be hard to attract them to your region. And boy, do these folks really value livable, walkable, cool, mixed use, the kinds of places that look like this picture. Dublin wanted to attract those folks so that they could hold on to the companies they had and attract more of them. Now, as we have moved into the era of a hybrid work, I've gone back to talk to HR directors and R&D directors and the kinds of folks who really have their finger on the pulse of workforce issues, and said, so now what are your thoughts about place-based planning? Does it matter? Does place matter as much as it did before when you were trying to attract talent to your company? And they said, yes, it matters more. It matters more because whether you're Canada North or companies that located in a single-use office park in Dublin and now need to attract workers and they're having a hard time because they say if their workforce isn't coming to the office or their workplace, they'd like them ideally living within 5 minutes of this workplace, and for a couple of reasons. One is that talent attracts talent, and they're much more likely to continue to be able to attract employees if they're not competing in Singapore or Seattle when they're located in Canada North or Ottawa or Dublin, just outside of Columbus, Ohio. It's much easier to recruit folks who live nearby, and those folks are much more likely to be interested in working in a place they can walk to than if they have to drive. But also, there is a phenomenon known as creative collisions, which are conversations that people who work for two different companies have, often by chance. They're unplanned conversations. You can't have an unplanned Zoom call, just doesn't work. So it turns out, and this I learned from the R&D directors at Canada North, that particularly innovation and tech firms, but anybody in the knowledge industry sphere, depends on ideas to ultimately produce the products they can commercialize and sell, make money from. Ideas are fed into the wide end of the funnel from these chance conversations, creative collisions that folks have who are thinking about different aspects of the same problem, don't even know it, have a conversation, realize they are, and come up with solutions that they then bring back to their respective companies. Brookings has pointed out, in fact, that it is the conversations between people working for different companies in the knowledge industry sphere, knowledge economy sphere, rather than the same company, that are much more productive in terms of innovative ideas. So a place like Bridge Park, where folks are living near each other, run into each other, go to the same brew pubs, etc., are much more likely be able to produce the new ideas companies need than employees working in a single-use office park who live in a nearby suburban house, who never find a reason to talk to each other, who don't run into each other. What are the thresholds for realizing this new suburban vision, same as an urban vision, and I'll call it renewed suburban success? And let's start with process. And this is something I've actually gone and often with my colleague Jason Beskey and talked about at lots of different conferences. It's probably a topic a lot of folks are interested in, particularly if they are the city managers or planning directors for suburban communities. It starts with leadership. This is Eva Columbos, who was the mayor of Sandy Springs, Georgia. Sandy Springs is in Fulton County. It only recently was organized recognized as a community in its own right. It was located in Fulton County, but it didn't want to be governed by Fulton County government anymore because they felt they were kind of too liberal and progressive. It didn't reflect Sandy Springs' values. So they wanted to create their own community, and Mayor Galambos led that effort. And then she said, you know what? We are a collection of wonderful single-family neighborhoods. There also was a larger kind of lower-income garden complex dimension to Sandy Springs, but they not only were minorities, they were a minority politically. You know, she said, all of us need a heart for our community. We need a new center. So she was the one who convened the conversation, convened the engagement for this politically very conservative community, an effort that eventually led to hiring us. And I remember the mayor at one point, how should I say it, at a dinner right before a city council meeting to talk about the plan, pointed out that I was probably the only Democrat at the table. And I say that to emphasize that this very conservative community made decisions to create a lively, new, mixed-use, higher-density, walkable center, something that none of them had envisioned when they bought their wonderful single-family house in Sandy Springs, because they came to understand the kinds of changes that we just talked about and why they would benefit from the amenity of a new walkable center, but also be more competitive to attract the next generation of jobs and investment. And the conversation started around what I'll call recalling Alfred E. Newman, who may not be familiar to many of you, but boy, he was the face of Mad Magazine, which was very cool when I was a kid. His line was, "What me worry?" You know, why did affluent folks in Dublin and Sandy Springs need to worry? Well, they needed to worry because housing markets were changing and the economy was changing. Their ability to attract jobs and investment was changing. And I will just say, in both communities, they caught on pretty quickly. This is the single-use sort of kind of office park that Dublin and Sandy Springs had both created for years, drawn lots of great jobs. They were in danger of losing these jobs, and they got it. And they wanted to hold on to them, and they got that the future looked much more like this, but that they needed now a series of not only need new planning, but new policies that would really support this change. So the first was creating something that, you know, is not instinctive to a suburb, traditional suburb, compact critical mass, as they redevelop the malls and strip centers and single-use office parks that created Bridge Park in downtown Sandy Springs, which they came to call City Springs. I loved it. This is back to Memphis. It's an urban place. When we did a new downtown for Memphis, they became very supportive of a notion that is helpful for any community anywhere, which is to say that all public investment in development, all incentives, And you basically need incentives, as I'll talk about in a minute, in most communities, particularly in suburbs, to create new higher density mixed-use walkable centers. And boy, do these incentives pay rich dividends. But they needed to focus their incentives for new housing where this housing could really bring streets to life. So it turns out about 1,000 new units within a 5-minute walk will bring a block of Main Street to life. Not because it provides all the support those retailers need, but because it provides enough support to attract a critical mass of retailers. The good folks of Memphis, this was downtown commission, realized that it's very hard to turn down a developer in one place that's more than 5 minutes from where you want to bring life to a street. If you've just offered a subsidy to somebody who's right next door to that street. So they needed public policy. They needed planning that said this is what we should do, and public policy, so they had something to rely on to make sure that they put this new housing investment in places where it would pay the rich dividends. Now think of the advantages to a suburb of new housing in a walkable mixed-use center, where this new housing can really bring vitality to life, attract talent, knowledge industry investment, create the kind of square that your family can bike to from its suburban house like they did in Dublin for ice cream. Think of that, the value of that compared to the same number of new single-family detached houses that further sprawl, cost much more in terms of providing public services, and basically pay back nothing in terms of new vitality, particularly these days when they're going to malls and strip centers much less often and spending much less because those dollars are being spent online.